Here to dive into industry trends with leading ETF experts, this is ETF Spotlight with Neena Mishra.
Hello and welcome to ETF Spotlight. I'm your host, Neena Mishra. My guest today is Nina Decker, Senior Research Analyst at ROBO Global. ROBO Global is a research company focused on robotics, intelligence, and healthcare technology. Nina, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Nina. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's start with healthcare technology. Robo Global, in fact, created the Index for Global Healthcare Technology and Innovation ETF with the ticker symbol HTEC. And I wanted to start with innovations which are related to the current global health crisis, because this has become the biggest priority for drug companies and many other companies around the world. And, in the past few days, some parts of our economy have started reopening, but any plans to reopen the economy on a large scale would really greatly depend on a robust testing and tracing system. And earlier this week, FDA had granted emergency use authorization to Quidel for the first antigen test for the coronavirus. And this test is believed to be faster, cheaper, and easier to manufacture than other tests which are being used currently. And Quidel is, I believe, one of the top holdings in your ETF. So could you talk about the work being done by Quidel?
Sure. Yeah. This was definitely a game changer, as you said, in terms of the world being able to get back to work, get back to school. And we could just take a step backwards. There have been a lot of leading diagnostic companies that have developed and commercialized COVID-19 tests thus far. And largely they can be sort of segmented in the type of tests where someone is diagnosing whether or not someone has an active COVID-19 infection, or the kind of test that diagnoses whether or not they have already had the infection. That would be the antibody test. So the first to detect whether or not there's an infection, all we've had thus far were molecular tests. And then the antibody test was sort of like the second round of tests to start getting approved and get commercialized. What's game-changing about Quidel is that this is the first antigen test. So this is answering that first question, whether or not the patient has an active infection. And what makes antigen tests so special? Well, different than a molecular test, and I won't get into all the weeds of the science, but this is an immunoassay type of test. And I guess the big picture is that, like you said, it's easier to run. The supplies needed to do this type of test are a little bit more available and much more widely available. In fact, the actual instrument that you run Quidel's test on, the Sophia 2, there are over 44,000 of these already installed around the world. So many places already have the instrument that's needed to run this test. And unlike a molecular test, which requires like some real specialized training, and if anything's done incorrectly along the process, you could wind up with a false negative. With this type of test, it's a little easier to do, and so it's therefore easier to deploy in a setting like a walk-in doctor office or a pharmacy or on a mass scale, because it operates kind of like a rapid flu test. So that's why that was so game-changing, and the stock has responded accordingly. Hence why this is one of our higher performing companies in the HTech index this quarter.
Okay, and talking about game-changing tests, there was another test which was by Abbott Laboratories, and this could provide results in 15 minutes. So this was also seen as a game changer. But it was recently reported that a new study from researchers at New York University said that this test could be missing almost half of positive cases. And Abbott has disputed those findings, and we will probably learn more in the coming days. So, could you tell us more about the Abbott tests or any other tests which are currently being used?
Well, I guess I'll speak a little bit more broadly about and maybe Abbott's getting picked on because it's a commercialized name, but there have been a lot of issues with false negatives, even false positives. There's just been a lot of issues with testing accuracy, and there's a lot of variables that go into that. For example, because thus far the diagnostic test was relying on that molecular methodology I talked about. This means that you take a swab, and you have to basically put it very deeply up the nasal cavity, and in order to get an adequate amount of the specimen, and then it has to go through a step where it's amplified, and if not enough got on the swab, then in that next process, you might not be able to get enough to even detect something later on when you're analyzing the specimen. And also that type of that molecular, that RNA template, if you will, it tends to degrade more quickly. So it's just a real sensitive thing that people have been trying to do thus far, and that doesn't necessarily negate Abbott's market or technology leadership in this. That they, among other companies, were able to come up with these tests quickly, bring them to market, bring them to scale. I guess what we can say is that we're all learning as we go through this process. And I don't believe that that recent study was yet peer reviewed. And like you said, there's more to come on that. But what I will say more broadly speaking is that this is a global effort. As you mentioned earlier, companies all over the world are trying to attack this problem from every which direction. And even though, let's say, Quidel's antigen test solves a problem of let's get this test available to the masses, so that we can get people back to work, there is still a need for those molecular tests. There's still going to be a need for the antibody tests, whether they're rapid or high throughput, whether they're done at the point of care or they get sent off to a lab where they can run thousands per day. There's still going to be a high demand for all this. And I have high confidence that all of these companies, particularly some of these large technology leaders, are still, I guess, learning and improving their products as they go along. And so I think that we should expect, broadly speaking, that everyone's trying to bring something and make it work, and that they're probably going to continue to learn how to improve it as more and more data comes out.
I agree with you because this is a new virus, new type of coronavirus, novel current coronavirus. So we are learning new things about this virus and how it impacts the human body. We are learning something new every day. So there would be a lot of changes, but a lot of efforts are being made, and many of them are going to be successful. Some will not be successful. And as far as the battle against this virus is concerned, our lives will return to normal only after we find a very effective vaccine for this virus. And many healthcare giants, including J&J and Pfizer, they are working on vaccines. And I think last week, FDA granted fast track status for Moderna's vaccine candidate for this virus. And I think Moderna is also one of the holdings in your ETF. So could you tell us a little bit about the vaccines that are being developed by Moderna or other companies, and when they are likely to be available?
Sure. Yeah. So, and exciting that you bring up Moderna. We actually conduct a quarterly rebalancing process in our index, if you will, and at which time we sort of trim the winners from the prior quarter. We add positions to the underperformers. But in addition to that, if we like a particular company and they meet our criteria, we might bring them in as new members, or potentially exclude people or companies that no longer fit in. And Moderna was one of those that was recently brought in into this quarter. So super exciting addition, because the stock itself has been up over 100% over the quarter. And like you said, it is largely because of this fast tracking of the development of a potential vaccine. Moderna really, at the end of Q1, in fact, hit headlines because it was able to develop a vaccine to begin in human trials within 42 days of identifying what the virus even was. So that pace is unprecedented. It often takes well over a year to get something ready to even put into a human for trials. But one of the things, this is Moderna's special secret sauce, is that it's like a digital biotech company. They use artificial intelligence, where they have a fully integrated system which uses AI to inform them of potential, like the starter of the mRNA technology. And maybe I'll just unpack that a bit. mRNA is what Moderna is working on. This is a type of methodology. The M stands for messenger. And if we look at vaccines, think about if this was a computer, and in order to protect the computer, you download antivirus software. That's basically what Moderna is working on with mRNA. So it brings the message to the human on how to develop a resistance to a potential future infection. And if this drug, this vaccine gets approved, it will be the first ever commercialized mRNA technology to ever, or in the world, to ever hit the market, which is very exciting, not just from a current standpoint when addressing the coronavirus, but this company, Moderna, has over 20 other mRNA therapies that are already undergoing clinical trials. So as you often see in that biotech space, when a new type of technology gets approved, it becomes kind of a positive catalyst for the other companies that are working on a similar technology. We saw that with another company that's in the H-Tech index called Alnylam with RNAi technology. And this is potentially going to happen with mRNA. And even if, let's say, this coronavirus vaccine does not make it through and get approved, like I said, they've got 20 other drugs plus in their pipeline that they're actively working on. Another thing that makes this company special and why they get to have such a rich pipeline is because they have this state-of-the-art manufacturing facility where when they get an idea that they can ramp very quickly because they're using AI to digest a lot of data at once, they can then very quickly start to put that into development because they've got their own factory. So their manufacturing facility is state-of-the-art. It's fully digitized, roboticized. This company is just right up the Robo Global alley in terms of their fit into what we invest in.
So while they are developing a vaccine, it may not be available anytime soon, either Moderna's vaccine or any other vaccine. So we are hoping that a treatment for the disease may become available sooner. And in fact, many companies are working on some of the existing drugs which have been used to treat malaria or HIV or arthritis, Ebola, etc., whether they can be repurposed to treat the coronavirus. And the one experts are most hopeful about is Gilead Sciences' antiviral drug remdesivir. And Regeneron has started clinical trials of its rheumatoid arthritis drug, whether that can be repurposed to treat this disease. And Regeneron is, in fact, also working on an antibody treatment, which is tailor-made for this disease. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So Regeneron is another member of the H-Tech index. And like you said, they are working on this. There's like a couple of different ways that all of these companies are approaching the treatment of coronavirus. One is through taking existing, already commercialized therapies and seeing if they could re-engineer it or just repurpose it as is. And another one is where some companies are looking to start something from scratch. And so there's different modalities in which companies are approaching it. And Regeneron is actually approaching this from several angles. So one is this commercialized drug that was used for rheumatoid arthritis and Kevzara, and essentially it's being used right now with critical patients and also with severe patients who are suffering from COVID-19. More studies are to come from that, but it is essentially helping to mitigate the there's a receptor for IL-6 that is found to have a high correlation and also be predictive in determining whether or not a patient could wind up having a severe complication, ultimately respiratory distress. So yes, this treatment could help mitigate that, and they're seeing better results with the critical end of the spectrum than they are thus far with the severe end, but they need to expand that into a larger trial because really it just requires a lot more data to see what's working and what's not working. But what I want to say about that trial is that it's having gone through that for Regeneron has laid the infrastructure for them to conduct more clinical trials. So what I mean by that is that they've already been in the hospital now working with two types of patients, critical and severe. So the groundwork is already laid from a clinical trial infrastructure standpoint for them to kind of flip the switch and start working on the clinical trial that is next in the pipeline. They're looking to begin in human trials in June for what you just described as the monoclonal antibody treatment. This is their antiviral treatment that they're working on. And what's really exciting about this, and talk about a company's ability to scale. Again, for them to go into in-human trial in June is unprecedented when we only just found out what this virus was technically in January. So usually it just takes, like I said before, at least a year and a half, if not much longer. But one of the reasons why they were able to get this so quickly is because they have this technology. They have a proprietary genetic engineering capability that they use for their monoclonal antibody treatments. And they were able to get something pretty quickly to work, I guess 90% of the time with Ebola. But luckily for the world, they did not proceed in continuing to use and commercialize that. But this proves their ability to scale. And every time they make something with this technology, they get smarter and smarter and better and faster. And that's why, based on what they learned from Ebola, they can pivot accordingly and start to put the science together for this virus. And they're very different viruses, and Regeneron knows that, but they know the nuances that are different from one type of virus to the next. They also have experience from MERS, which is a much more similar. It's another coronavirus, and so they were able to leverage what they've already learned from that, and now they're going to be able to leverage the infrastructure that's been laid through the clinical trial that's already been running for the rheumatoid arthritis therapy. And so hopefully they can start to move this along, hopefully quickly. And what I'll also say on that is that one of the things that takes so long for treatments, vaccines, to come to market is that it takes a while for the world to see whether or not it works. And in the case with this infection, COVID-19, when you give someone a vaccine during the clinical trial, there isn't really a way to see if it's working like aggressively. You just kind of have to wait and see if they ever get infected with coronavirus. And that can take a long time, because what if they're not exposed to anybody with the virus? And because we don't have a treatment yet, well, there are some that are very close and some that are fast tracked, et cetera. But some of the treatments that exist right now are for those severely ill patients thus far. It's unethical at this stage, when we have such little treatment and not enough information about this virus, to just to sort of fast track a vaccine trial. That being said, if Regeneron can bring this antiviral treatment to the forefront, even if it gets approved, this could actually help facilitate and accelerate potentially the vaccine trials, because now you actually have a real treatment and a way so that if somebody were to take the vaccine and if they were to undergo what they call a challenge trial, so maybe submerge them or provide the vaccine to someone who lives in a household of someone who is infected. Now you've actually got a treatment to say, okay, if something happens, you're low risk, but we have a way to treat it anyway. So here we go. Anyway, it could. All I'm saying, if we just look at the big picture, is that it could actually accelerate some of this other development.
So even when we find, even after we find a vaccine for this virus and some very effective treatments, I think this pandemic is going to transform the way we live forever. And I think many people would want to avoid doctors' offices and other public places where they may come in contact with either with this virus or any other virus. So do you think we will see greater adoption of telemedicine in the post-pandemic world?
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely. I think that we're going to get to a point where people are going to be talking about life before telemedicine the same way that they talk about life before the internet. And actually, we conducted a survey recently just to quantify, because we hear there is an uptick in telemedicine. We hear the White House recommending that you use it. That's the first time that's ever happened. So we wanted to quantify how many people have actually tried it. And we surveyed over 1,000 consumers across different demographics, age, household income, different geographies. And what we found is that over 51% of respondents have tried telemedicine at least once, which is staggering, because just only a few years ago, if we had conducted the same survey, most people would probably not have even heard of telemedicine. And so now here we have over half of the consumers that have tried it, but we also asked them, when did you try it? And over half of those respondents, 52%, said that they tried it during March and April. That is more than triple the run rate going into the pandemic. But prior to that, about 14% of respondents said that they had tried it. So a huge leap. And what that means to the industry is that it's brought a lot of new first-time users. And what history has shown us about telemedicine is that once people use it, they learn how easy it is. And like, who wouldn't rather talk to the doctor while at home while they're sick than have to get in their car, especially if it's cold outside? You live in Chicago. I could imagine in the wintertime, it's more appealing to speak to a doctor remotely. So once people try it, they have an increased likelihood of using it again. So we asked our consumers, how likely are you to use telemedicine again? 93% of them indicated likelihood of using it again. And in fact, 59% said that they were very likely. So yeah, proving yes, new people are in the pool and they're very likely to use it again. But you still have people wondering, is this growth sustainable, or is this a one-time deal? As doctor offices start to open back up, are people gonna just go back to doing medicine the old way? And what we think is that it's sustainable in terms of growth because the number of use cases has also expanded. We asked our respondents in our survey, when you use telemedicine, what did you use it for? And prior to the pandemic, most of the time that people used telemedicine was for this traditional general medical visit. So somebody has allergy or a cold or a sinus infection, low acuity but urgent needs. And then what we found is that the people who used it during the pandemic were using it for all kinds of things. Management of chronic conditions, increasingly using it for mental behavioral health visits with a therapist, follow-up care. Someone was already sick or already discharged after a procedure and getting getting to see their doctor via video conferencing instead of having to drive back for follow-up. Also checkups. People weren't using telemedicine before for routine checkups. So every single new slice of this pie, new area that's been introduced to this industry, in our view, represents multi-billion dollars worth of additional new addressable market. And so the question remains, because a lot of this is being done for the first time now because legislative reasons. There were various barriers, such as not being able to be reimbursed for your doctor appointment if you're a doctor, or not having the correct technology in place to make sure that you're HIPAA compliant, to maintain patient data safety standards. So when those sort of rules and regulations get revised when we come out of the pandemic, the question remains, is the government going to continue to support the use of remote doctor-patient visits? And in our view, we think that they will. One, because the consumers are going to demand it, as we've already seen from our survey. And two, now that doctors have tried it and they're seeing that it's easy and it makes sense, maybe they're going to want to keep doing it too. So we think the demand is there, and that ultimately we're going to continue to see that growth, and that it hopefully will be continued to be covered from a legislative perspective.
Yeah, definitely an area with a lot of growth potential. So, can you talk a little bit about some of the companies doing innovative work in this area?
Sure. I mean, so telemedicine specifically, there are two publicly traded peer plays that are in the H-Tech Index. One is Teladoc, based in the US. They operate in over 120 countries worldwide. There's also Ping An, technology and healthcare company. They're based in Shanghai. They trade on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Both of those companies stocks are performing over 100% year to date. And then there are other privately owned companies around the world. Babylon is a large market leader in the UK. In the US, you've got MD Live, Amwell, are other players in this. And I guess what I'll also say is that while that's the telemedicine landscape, what we believe represents the much broader opportunity. If you think of concentric circles, telemedicine is just one part of the broader telehealth opportunity. And what I mean by that is we view telehealth as all-encompassing remote healthcare. So whether it's doctor-patient visits, whether it's remote patient monitoring using devices, whether it's doctor-to-doctor communication, device-to-doctor communication, there is a broader, massive market opportunity that is in this telehealth, or if you will, virtual care landscape. And so when we look at telemedicine, yes, there's been growth. But what's really exciting is what else is there? And Teladoc actually acquired a company. Well, they announced the acquisition in January of a company called InTouch. It's scheduled to close at the end of Q2. And it was very fortuitous timing with this acquisition because InTouch specializes in that broader telehealth capability. So they are they are essentially enabling virtual care, and they are already present in over 4,000 providers around the US. And when we say enabling virtual care, it's like a network that connects the doctor to doctor, doctor to patient. It helps to enable a patient talking to his or her own doctor, versus the traditional telemedicine model is where you're sick, you're at home, and you get some doctor on the phone that's available. There is a very huge barrier to climb in terms of technological capabilities, data protection, safety, infrastructure, integration to enable this doctor talking to doctor's own patient and enabling care across many specialties. And so there's a huge opportunity for that. Like when I mentioned earlier that one growing area for telemedicine would be in managing chronic conditions. that's with a patient's own doctor, right? So the doctor office or the hospital needs a platform in place, an infrastructure in place to help something like that happen. And InTouch does so much more. They have a partnership with Intuitive Surgical, the pioneer in robotic assisted surgery, another member of the H Tech Index, and they're helping to integrate the surgeon's console when a doctor is conducting robotic surgery. Their face is looking inside of a console while their hands are maneuvering the device to conduct the robotic surgery. And when they need to look at something else, like another image, they have to pick their head up out of the console and look at something else, and then they put their head back in. But they're working on integration through the InTouch network to underlie some of that technology to make things more streamlined. And this is just one example of how we see a future, and it's rapidly growing and expanding into this, where virtual care is going to underlie every facet of healthcare around the world as we know it. In fact, there's already a doctor, a cardiologist in India, he's doing robotic assisted surgery with a Corindus device. Corindus was acquired by Siemens Healthineers last year. It was one of the largest robotics acquisitions in the world, and he has already conducted 5 remote telerobotic surgeries from 20 miles away. So as we look to the future, and if you think about the worldwide adoption of 5G, which is going to give us more robust internet capabilities, maybe we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of remote everything. And that as we get more robust telemedicine internet capabilities combined with government funding, so as the world looks to climb out of this economic mess that's been created by this pandemic, we anticipate a high degree of stimulus. And so part of that stimulus could be go invest in technology that's going to help you prepare hospital and doctor office for any future potential pandemic or any future wave of this pandemic. We also see funding go toward further research and development, because I feel like a huge spotlight has been cast on the scientific community now. And so in one of the iterations of the CARES Act, I think nearly $1 billion was heading toward the National Institute of Health for research and development. So all of those scientists are going to need to buy the tools and the instruments needed, and that there's going to be more stimulus and further acceleration in diagnostics, genomics, and precision medicine. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in healthcare innovation.
So, yeah, very interesting developments you talked about in the telehealth space. So, which are the areas of healthcare do you think will see a lot of innovation in the post-pandemic world? One thing which we all have noticed is that this virus affects people so differently. There are many people who remain asymptomatic. Some develop severe symptoms, some become so sick that they have to be hospitalized, and some people, thankfully a very small percentage, they die because of this virus. So I think more precision care, which is tailored to each individual's genetic code, and personalized medicine, they will see greater adoption in the coming months and years. Probably greater use of data analytics, AI, machine learning, medical technology, and genomics in the coming months and years. So could you talk a little bit about other areas of innovation?
Sure. There's another interesting company in the H Tech Index called Natera, and Natera has new technology. They're the world market leader in prenatal testing, a test called NIPT. And this is a genomic test, but they are expanding into other areas like oncology. And they have a very interesting colorectal screening test for the recurrence of colorectal cancer through this new Signatera technology of theirs. So they're an example of how they were able to leverage existing market-leading technology and do something new with this same platform. But I guess the genius of this is that one of the keys that AI and data analytics and further research and development are going to help us with is early detection. Because if you can detect something early, you can either I don't know, ward it off sooner or take care of it before it becomes out of hand and save lives. And so Natera has proven that when somebody might be at risk of a recurrence of colorectal cancer, that they can catch it 9 months sooner than if they were not to use their testing capability. And their test is personalized. So when we talk about personalized medicine, it's done for each and every individual patient who undergoes the test.
Very interesting. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about other areas which will be transformed after this pandemic. And one area that I see is robotics and automation. And in fact, over the past few years, we have seen a move towards automation in a range of jobs because companies in general, they are looking to cut costs and improve efficiency. But now they will try to focus on minimizing close human contact and enforce social distancing directives, which is likely to continue even in some form even after the crisis subsides. So we could see more industries to, accelerate the use of automation. Do you think we will see robots in grocery stores or floor cleaning? I read that Walmart is already using autonomous floor cleaning robots in some of their stores to scrub the floors. So which areas and industries do you think will see fastest automation?
Oh, definitely in line with what you're saying, relative to trying to support the working remotely or keeping people from having to physically do things themselves. We could see further automation happening in transportation, in logistics. So when we think about warehouses, getting those even more automated, basically, I think the world is our oyster here. If we ever have a way to have autonomous vehicles, whether it's inside of a warehouse to help with inventory, for example, or even outside to help deliver packages. These are fewer ways that humans would then need to put themselves at risk. And there is a lot of innovation happening in that world right now, and we continue to see more of that over the next 5-10 years.
Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your ETF, which provides exposure to global companies which are leading the healthcare technology revolution. So please tell us a little bit about this ETF and how it selects its holdings.
Yeah, so we do it. Maybe I'll take a step backward. ROBO was founded 7 years ago because the market was looking for a way to invest in robotics, automation, and AI as a theme. And so 7 years later, through our work in the fields of robotics, automation, and AI, we saw a lot of disruption happening in the healthcare landscape. And so last June, we launched the second strategy. The ticker is HTEC, HTEC, Healthcare Technology, sort of abbreviated. And so what we do is it's a research-driven methodology, and that's what makes us different than other strategies that are out there. We conduct proprietary fundamental research that is supported by global world leaders and PhDs and entrepreneurs that help us stay abreast of new trends. And so we look at across the entire healthcare landscape, and we developed a list of proprietary subsectors, if you will, of how the areas that we believe represent the most disruption and the most growth opportunity over the next 5, 10 plus years. Areas such as data analytics, telehealth, diagnostics, genomics, precision medicine, really all of the areas that we just talked about earlier. And so what you have is a combination of this, looking across this innovative landscape. You get a portfolio that's comprised mostly of small and mid cap companies, most of which many investors don't already own. And so that's one of the things that differentiates our strategy from other healthcare indexes out there. As we look at healthcare in general, particularly since the pandemic, healthcare has been somewhat resilient in the market. Compared to the global equity markets, which are down year to date, healthcare has been mainly resilient, but H-Tech in particular is actually up over 5% year to date. And it's because not just are people looking at healthcare as a safe place, but they're looking at healthcare innovation as the next area to be driving the technology revolution over the next decade. So when we talk about all these companies rapidly innovating to address coronavirus, what they're doing is they're demonstrating to us what they're capable of doing moving forward, because there's no going back. And now that the world has gotten a taste of things like telehealth, remote monitoring, bringing a vaccine to market quickly, bringing a treatment to patients within a year, this is probably going to continue to be expected to some degree moving forward. And like I said, we're going to have increased consumer demand. We're going to have increased research and development, increased government funding that are all going to continue to drive this innovation moving forward. And that's what's reflected in the performance of the H-Tech strategy.
Right. Excellent. That's all we have time for today. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about H-Tech or other ROBO Global ETFs, please visit roboglobaletfs.com. Make sure to be on the lookout for the next edition of ETF Spotlight, and also make sure to subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, please email podcast@zacks.com.
This material is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein constitutes investment, legal, accounting, or tax advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold a security. Do not act or rely upon the information and advice given in this podcast without seeking the services of competent and professional legal, tax, or accounting counsel. Publication and distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and the information contained herein does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No recommendation or advice is being given as to whether any investment or strategy is suitable for a particular investor. It should not be assumed that any investments in securities, companies, sectors, or markets identified and described were or will be profitable. All information is current as of the date herein and is subject to change without notice. Any views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Zacks Investment Research as a whole.